I have a few flocks that are in permanent collections of hospitals and healthcare centers, and so I tend to apply for those jobs. And I've always wanted to collaborate with somebody. And when this job came up for a healthcare center in Texas, I thought of Jacqui because I thought of my work is airy and she has such density and delicacy, and I just saw them together. Shaped pieces of her paintings and my birds flying throughout, maybe over the wetlands. And then we centered on the oceans because of both of our influences from the ocean. And then talked to Carla, and that's how it came about.
And I think that's part of it, knowing each other. You kind of know who you might have a good chance at collaborating with. It's
yeah.
When you have personalities that jive well, and I think also values too. I would say is a really important part of it too.
Yeah, I think you were a little bit reluctant at one point.
I was definitely more reluctant, and that's because for Susan, if she makes her birds and creates a flock and the installation doesn't work, well, she can use the birds perhaps in another installation. For me, I was taking a big leap because I don't normally paint on shaped substrate. So this was something very unusual. So I had to figure out what would the material be, what would the shapes be, and also they probably wouldn't stand on their own. So it's a big risk.
So it was a commitment.
Yeah, it was more of a commitment for her.
Yeah.
And it was also a really super short timeline, and so that added to the excitement. Yeah, we wanted that magic of what you see out in the natural world. But of course, we both work abstractly. So we're not doing a totally representation, we're not trying to. So, and you wouldn't see so we've created, the paintings are like elongated cloud shapes that are kind of like portals, windows into the ocean.
Yeah.
So when Susan first suggested, hey, how about one of my flock of birds with your paintings and shaped paintings, the first question was, well, what will those shapes be? So we started there that was the first thing to resolve. And I had large sheets of craft paper, and I immediately thought of this sort of elongated cloud shape, but I didn't want to lock her into, had no idea what she was envisioning. So I cut out various shapes, and then I tried things that were very different from these shapes, just to give her options and see her response. So that there was a little give and take in that part of the process.
But I started just focusing on birds about 10 years ago, and I had been doing a Chesapeake Bay series and wanted to make it be like three-dimensional somehow. And then I realized, okay, I've got 16 layers on this canvas and it's still 2D. So I thought, I've got to start with 3D from the get-go. So I started making the simplest form I could think of, which was just a rudimentary bird form. Then I cut my drawings up and wrapped it around the birds. And my friend said, great, now you've made mummies. And I said, hey, there's nothing wrong with mummies. It's honoring a life. But then from there it developed and, became flocks, and then I became interested in their behaviors and their bird songs and everything, migration patterns, and then that led to realizing what an impact we as humans make on the demise of birds in our population,
That started, for me, doing ocean-centric works really started with an experience that I had at the end of February 2020, where I was visiting a beach for the first time in Florida. And when I first approached the beach from high above, it just looked like this stunning place. There was hardly anybody there on the beach that day. It was a little cool. The beach was just this white sandy beach. I was just thrilled. And I made my way down the stairs and got down to the sand, and that's when I realized the beach was covered in plastic. So there was just an enormous amount of plastic trash marine plastic debris that had been washed up ashore. And it was quite shocking to me. It made a really strong impression. I had never worked on ocean-centric works before that. So what I decided to do is I returned 2 days later. It was my last day in Florida. And I brought, gloves and bags and things to pick up plastic trash. I spent hours picking up trash, and I documented the process along the way. And then later, right before the onset of lockdown, I started using my images as image transfers into plastic trash. And so the single-use plastic, I was using dry cleaning bags and other pieces of plastic and paint. And those works are here at Masoni Art. So those plastic works really made me think more about the marine plastic debris, and then I started making other works in that same motif. Then in that same technique, and then I started painting these abstract ocean works where some of them reference the bleaching of corals, others had to do with plastic in the ocean, and that's where I went.